Epstein was an intelligence asset. Jeffrey Epstein's ability to cultivate relationships with powerful individuals across politics, business, and academia, including 2 U.S. presidents, British royalty, and innumerable celebrities, has fueled significant suspicion around who he really was and how he obtained such powerful connections with the swiftness that he did. The public narrative of Epstein's crimes began to unfold in 2005 when Florida police started investigating allegations of sexual abuse of underage girls. Despite the severity of the accusations, Epstein secured a controversial plea deal in 2008 that allowed him to serve just 13 months in county jail with work release privileges. According to the suspicions that Epstein's influence extended far beyond his visible connections was the federal immunity granted to his potential co-conspirators. A non-prosecution agreement reached in 2007 between Epstein and federal prosecutors in Florida included an unusual provision that granted immunity not only to Epstein, but also to any potential accomplices, both known and unknown. This clause was extraordinarily broad and unconventional, effectively shielding anyone who might have been involved in Epstein's criminal activities from federal prosecution. Beneath the surface of this already disturbing and suspicious tale lies the more complex and potentially far-reaching theory that Jeffrey Epstein was not merely a predator and financier, but an intelligence asset working for multiple governments. This theory suggests that Epstein's entire operation, from his mysterious wealth to his extensive network of powerful associates, was part of an elaborate honey trap scheme designed to gather compromising information on the world's most powerful and influential elite figures, forcing them into submission. The mystery begins with Epstein's background and the unexplained source of his immense wealth. According to court documents, he possessed assets worth at least $500 million and earned more than $10 million annually. Yet financial investigators noted that so little was known about his clients or business operations that only his properties could be valued with certainty. His obscured source of financial wealth aligns with typical intelligence operations where funding is deliberately concealed to maintain plausible deniability. Epstein's professional history contains several red flags, potentially suggesting intelligence connections. In the 1980s, he described himself as a, quote, high-level bounty hunter who recovered stolen money through his consulting firm, Intercontinental Assets Group, Incorporated. During this period, Epstein possessed an Austrian passport with his photo, but a false name showing his residence as Saudi Arabia. This is precisely the type of documentation that would benefit someone operating in intelligence circles. He also maintained connections with Adnan Khashoggi, a Saudi Arabian businessman who served as a middleman transferring American weapons from Israel to Iran during the Iran-Contra affair, an operation involving multiple intelligence agencies. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from Alexander Acosta, who, as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, negotiated the controversial 2008 plea deal that allowed Epstein to avoid serious federal charges. According to reports, Acosta later told interviewers from President Trump's transition team that he had been told Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence and to, quote, leave it alone, suggesting the case was above his pay grade. This extraordinary statement implies that pressure from intelligence circles influenced the notoriously lenient treatment Epstein received. Although many will say that there is little concrete evidence connecting him to any particular government or intelligence agency, his connection to Israeli intelligence specifically is strengthened through Epstein's longtime companion, Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father, Robert Maxwell, a powerful British media tycoon, allegedly had significant ties to Israeli intelligence services. U.S. journalists Dylan Howard, Melissa Cronin, and James Robertson linked Epstein to the Israeli Mossad in their book, Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales, based on testimony from former Israeli intelligence officer Ari Ben-Menashe. According to Ben-Menashe, Epstein's activities as a spy served to gather compromising material on powerful people specifically for blackmail purposes. Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent accusers who later sued Prince Andrew, has publicly hinted at believing these intelligence connections. She shared on social media a post suggesting Epstein was linked to Mossad or the CIA, running a blackmail operation to, quote, entrap elite oligarchs. Adding to this intrigue, according to reports from the Wall Street Journal and other sources, William J. Burns, the previous director of the CIA, had scheduled meetings with Jeffrey Epstein in 2014 during his time serving as Deputy Secretary of State. These meetings included a lunch in Washington, D.C., and 2 appointments at Epstein's New York townhouse. A CIA spokesperson claims that Burns merely hoped Epstein would help him, quote, transition to the private sector, as he allegedly was planning on leaving government service at the time. However, the exact details of these meetings were not recorded. Such meetings between a high-ranking government official and a convicted sex offender raise questions about what roles he could have potentially played within the CIA. The infrastructure of the alleged blackmail operation appears sophisticated and deliberate, if true. According to police reports and witness testimony, Epstein installed concealed cameras throughout his properties, particularly in bedrooms and bathrooms. When authorities raided his Palm Beach residence in 2006, they discovered 2 hidden cameras. Maria Farmer, who worked for Epstein in 1996, described a hidden media room in his New York mansion, accessed through a concealed door where individuals monitored feeds from pinhole cameras placed throughout the house, including in private areas where individuals were secretly recorded without their knowledge. Ghislaine Maxwell allegedly told a friend that Epstein's island was wired for video, and this friend believed that her and Epstein were filming them for blackmail. This surveillance infrastructure aligns exactly with how an intelligence agency would set up a honey trap operation. The goal would be to create compromising situations, record them, and then use them to coerce or control powerful individuals. Power such an operation could grant the puppet masters at the top is horrifying to think about, and honestly, it's something that makes me a little bit nervous making videos like this in the first place. Listed on the Epstein flight logs and in his so-called Black Book of Contacts, we find the following names. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton reportedly flew on Epstein's plane multiple times between 2002 and 2003. Prince Andrew has been documented as a passenger on Epstein's flights and was accused by Virginia Giuffre of trafficking her through Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Also listed is actor Kevin Spacey, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, billionaire Richard Branson, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom Tony Blair, and former Prime Minister of Israel Ehud Barak. All of these people allegedly appear in records connecting them to Epstein in some fashion. The control of such powerful individuals through blackmail operations stemming from such secretive organizations could have extremely profound consequences on society, world politics, and the direction of human history as a whole. The Department of Justice discovered further evidence suggesting blackmail when they found compact discs locked in Epstein's New York mansion safe with handwritten labels, including descriptions like young name plus name. Epstein himself hinted at possessing compromising information when he told a New York Times reporter off the record in 2018 that he had, quote, dirt on powerful people, including details about their sexual activities and drug use. Obviously, not everyone subscribes to this intelligence asset theory. Alan Dershowitz, who served as one of Epstein's attorneys during the 2008 plea negotiations, firmly denied that Epstein had intelligence ties. Dershowitz stated that as Epstein's lead negotiator with prosecutors, he would have known about any such connections and would have leveraged them in negotiations. Quote, "Believe me, I would have known about it. I would have used it to my advantage and to his advantage." He told this to reporters, adding that in past cases involving clients with intelligence connections, he had used those ties as leverage, but such connections, quote, "never came up during any of our negotiations regarding Epstein." However, critics of Dershowitz's denial point out that if Epstein were indeed operating at the command of intelligence agencies, such information would be compartmentalized on a strict need-to-know basis. Even his attorneys might have been kept in the dark about the full scope of his activities and connections. Furthermore, if intelligence agencies were involved in protecting Epstein, they almost certainly would have colluded with all parties involved on the defense team behind the scenes to conceal his intelligence connections. Understanding Epstein through this lens also provides context for his extensive connections to prominent politicians, business leaders, academics, and royalty. Rather than merely seeking social status, these relationships may have been cultivated specifically to create opportunities for compromising the individuals involved. The theory also helps to explain how someone with relatively modest beginnings could amass enormous wealth with no clear business model beyond managing money for a very limited clientele. Intelligence agencies worldwide have used honeypot operations like these to control potential adversaries or assets. I'm obligated to note that definitive proof of Epstein's intelligence connections remain murky. The suppressed Gnostic Gospels. In the winter of 1945, an extraordinary discovery occurred in the deserts of Upper Egypt that would change our understanding of early Christianity. An Arab peasant named Muhammad Ali al-Saman, while digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi, unearthed a sealed red earthenware jar standing almost a meter high. Initially hesitant to break it out of fear that a jinn or spirit might dwell inside, the lure of potential treasure prompted him to shatter the vessel. What he found was not gold or jewels, but 13 leather-bound papyrus books containing 52 ancient texts. These texts, known collectively as the Nag Hammadi Library, include early Christian writings that had been suppressed and excluded from the biblical canon. The discovery was a trove of ancient wisdom that had remained hidden for nearly 2 millennia. This accidental discovery would prove more valuable than any material treasure, for these texts were previously unknown Gnostic Gospels that had been systematically suppressed, banned, and completely eradicated from history by the early Orthodox Christian Church, with the sole exception of the textual remnants contained within that red jar. I want to add that we briefly did touch on one of the other Gnostic texts in Volume 5 of the Disturbing Rabbit Hole collection when we discussed the Gospel of Judas, which is very similar to those found here in the jar near Nag Hammadi in 1945, but that text wouldn't be found until several decades later, until the 1970s. So if any of this sounds familiar, that's why. The story of these texts begins long before their burial in the Egyptian desert. During the formative years of Christianity, from the late 1st century through the early 3rd century, a diverse array of Christian communities existed with widely varying interpretations of Jesus' teachings. Among these were the Gnostics, not a unified sect, but rather various groups sharing certain core beliefs centered around gnosis, a Greek word meaning knowledge. It referred to a direct, personal, and mystical knowledge of the divine that would lead to salvation and eternal life. While mainstream Christianity increasingly emphasized faith in Christ's death and resurrection, Gnostic Christians sought spiritual illumination through secret teachings they claimed Jesus had shared with only his closest disciples. These texts were written sometime between the years 100 and 300 AD, meaning they were created just several lifetimes after the death of the historical Jesus. The Gospel of Thomas, for instance, begins with the words, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke," immediately establishing itself as containing privileged information not meant for all ears. The Nag Hammadi library contains a diverse array of texts, including the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, the Apocalypse of Paul, the Apocalypse of Adam, and the Acts of Peter and the 12 Apostles. These texts were written in Coptic, an Egyptian language, and are believed to be 4th century copies of older documents. The cosmology presented in these Gnostic texts radically departed from what would eventually become mainstream Christian doctrine. Rather than viewing the material world as God's good creation, many Gnostic texts described our physical universe as fundamentally flawed, created not by the true supreme God, but by a lesser deity called the Demiurge, often identified with the Old Testament God. This Demiurge, they taught, was ignorant and sometimes malevolent, keeping human souls trapped in material bodies and ignorant of their divine origins. According to Gnostic texts like the Apocryphon of John and On the Origin of the World, humans contained within them a divine spark originating from the true God beyond this world. The physical realm was viewed as a prison, and salvation came not through faith in Christ's physical resurrection, as in mainstream Christianity, but through awakening to one's true divine nature through special knowledge or gnosis. The early Orthodox Church saw this as heretical and sought to suppress it. Even more scandalous to Orthodox sensibilities was the special status granted to female disciples, particularly Mary Magdalene. In texts like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary, Mary Magdalene appears not merely as a follower, but as Jesus' most spiritually advanced disciple and bearer of secret teachings. The Gospel of Philip even suggests an intimate relationship, stating that Jesus, quote, loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often. Jesus himself appears quite different in these texts than in the Catholic Bible that we read today. Rather than emphasizing that his suffering and death was paying the price for humanity's sins, the Gnostic Jesus functions primarily as a revealer of hidden knowledge. Gnostic teachings varied, but generally held that salvation came through attaining gnosis, this direct mystical knowledge of the divine. Gnosis was seen as a means of awakening the divine spark within oneself and escaping the material world, which was considered evil or flawed, and Jesus was often viewed as a revealer of this divine knowledge. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus does not die for our sins, but instead offers cryptic sayings that, when properly understood, lead to eternal life. The text declares, "Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death." The Gospel of Philip goes further, asserting that those who attain gnosis become, quote, no longer a Christian, but a Christ. This radical idea that individuals could achieve divine status through mystical knowledge rather than church-mediated salvation posed an existential threat to the developing hierarchy of the Christian church. By the mid-2nd century, church fathers like Irenaeus of Lyons were actively working to refute and suppress these alternative forms of Christianity. In his influential work, Against Heresies, Irenaeus attacked the Gnostics for their radical reinterpretation of Scripture and their claim to possess secret teachings from Jesus not found in the emerging canonical Gospels. The battle against competing belief systems surrounding Jesus played a significant role in the formation of the canonical New Testament, as Orthodox leaders sought to establish authoritative texts that countered these perceived threats to their authority and what they believed to be the truth behind the life of Jesus. These actions deliberately excluded large numbers of competing interpretations of Jesus' life, including the Gnostic writings. Those possessing banned texts faced potential persecution, possibly explaining why the Nag Hammadi manuscripts were carefully sealed in a jar and hidden in the desert. What makes these texts forbidden knowledge isn't merely their alternative theology, but their fundamental challenge to religious authority. The Gnostic emphasis on direct mystical experience of the divine threatened the emerging church's power. Gnostic texts suggest that divine relation didn't end with Jesus' disciples, but continued through mystical experiences available to all spiritual seekers. The Gospel of Thomas captures this revolutionary idea in Jesus' words. "The kingdom of God is inside of you and all around you, not in buildings of wood and stone. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift a stone, and you will find me." Instead of allowing competing interpretations, the early Christian church silenced these ancient voices, their words buried in the desert sands, waiting patiently for the day when they would once again speak their forbidden knowledge to a world ready to listen. The discovery of these suppressed Gnostic texts has profoundly changed our view of early Christianity's diversity. Far from the unified church we see today, it turns out early Christianity was an intense battleground of theological ideas, all debating Jesus' true message. With us now living in a period 2,000 years after the time Jesus would have lived, it's fascinating to consider what knowledge was lost to time. What vital information surrounding the life of Jesus has been snuffed out forever? What divine truths regarding the universe might we now be disconnected from? The truth is unclear. Intentional population poisoning. It is an unfortunate reality that our modern industrial world has spawned poisons, afflicting the minds and bodies of humanity in nearly every single aspect of our daily lives. Ranging from the declining quality of our food to the presence of toxic chemicals in nearly everything we touch and consume, from the manipulation of our minds through addictive media to issues of overmedication and the rise of various drug epidemics. The evidence for this assault is undeniable, but the more profound question, in my opinion at least, is whether or not this is all simply the result of unchecked capitalistic greed, or something more sinister at play, a coordinated effort to degrade humanity's physical and mental well-being. This is scary to consider, but it definitely doesn't feel out of the question anymore when we look at how horrific the state of our world's health has become, and how, honestly, intentional the subtle poisoning of our society feels. It seems like we have to go far out of our way just to eat clean food, drink clean water, and avoid manipulation and addiction through our entertainment. The nutritional quality of our food supply has experienced an alarming decline over the past several decades. According to extensive studies, the nutrient density of fruits, vegetables, and food crops in general has fallen dramatically in the previous 50 to 70 years, with significant reductions of essential minerals including sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and iron. This nutritional collapse isn't merely theoretical. It's a measurable phenomenon that has accelerated alongside the industrialization of agriculture. The official narrative suggests this decline stems from several factors. The inconsistent or haphazard use of fertilizers in agricultural production, manufacturers' preference for less nutrition but higher yielding varieties, soil depletion, and the shift from natural farming to chemical-intensive methods. This explanation, despite certainly being accurate, fails to address why agricultural policies worldwide consistently prioritize yield over nutrition despite known negative health consequences.
The Drug Administration rejected a proposed ban on products containing the chemical BPA. They admit they're concerned over some of the effects on young children, but officials say the studies are too small to see if the chemical poses a risk to human health. BPA is a sealant used in plastic containers and in canned food. Some researchers believe it can cause cancer. BPA is already banned in baby bottles, but there are a few other things officials recommend.
It raises the question of whether this nutritional degradation could be by design rather than accident. Throughout history, a malnourished population has proven easier to control and manipulate, weaker in body and mind, more susceptible to propaganda, and less able to resist authority. Those who profit from both industrial agriculture and pharmaceutical treatments for nutritional deficiencies benefit immensely from this status quo, raising uncomfortable questions about whether our food supply is deliberately being engineered to create dependency and docility. Alongside nutritional decline, we face unprecedented exposure to synthetic chemicals and toxins. Research consistently reveals that chemicals found in common plastics increase health risks throughout the entire human life cycle, impacting birth outcomes, child neurodevelopment, reproductive health, and metabolic, endocrine, and nutrition systems. These chemicals are virtually inescapable in modern life, present in everything from plastic food packaging, which leaches into the product, to household cleaning products, and even to carcinogens found in cheap fast fashion clothing from suppliers like Temu and Shein. Again, the conventional explanation holds that these risks represent unfortunate side effects of technological progress, collateral damage in society's pursuit of convenience and efficiency. The thing is, this narrative crumbles when we consider that many of these chemicals remain in wide use despite decades of research demonstrating their harmful effects and the lack of any government regulation barring them from entering our markets. The power of the chemical industry to suppress regulation, coupled with the minimal media coverage these dangers receive, suggests the possibility of some deeper agenda. The assault on our well-being continues into the digital realm, where social media and entertainment have become sophisticated tools for psychological manipulation. Research has established clear links between social media use and deteriorating mental health, particularly among young people. Social media has been associated with poor sleep patterns, depression, and anxiety. These platforms are deliberately engineered to maximize addiction and emotional manipulation. On top of this, media outlets have, in many ways, hijacked democracy, becoming authoritative vehicles for persuasion. The viral nature of information on these networks can cause deep rifts within the population. This psychological architecture serves powerful interests by fracturing social cohesion, promoting divisiveness, and cultivating a population that is chronically anxious, depressed, and disconnected from reality. In my opinion, I think it's time we finally take a step back and look at how awfully polluted our media has become. As silly as it might seem on the surface, the rise of brain rot humor among young people is something we need to begin to look deeper into. I'm not gonna lie, I find a lot of this stuff hilarious. I'm a total victim of this, but seriously, this kind of mind-numbing content is being pumped into our minds across social media applications controlled by billion-dollar corporations, and sometimes even from platforms which operate underneath the thumb of adversarial governments to many Western countries. The question we now need to ask is whether this is merely the residue of profit-seeking behavior, or potentially something a little bit more calculated. The concentrated ownership of these platforms among a small elite breeds the potential for influence operations that far exceed advertising. Perhaps the most direct form of modern poisoning comes through pharmaceuticals and the medication of our population. The pharmaceutical industry routinely exaggerates the effectiveness of its products while downplaying safety risks. The incentive structure is clear here. There is intense financial motivation for pharmaceutical companies not only to develop new drugs, but also to market these products as widely as possible, regardless of their actual need or safety. Remember, the goal of a for-profit business is always, at its core, just that: profit, regardless of whatever corporate pushes as their mission statement or publishes on their website. When a hepatitis C drug like Sovaldi can be sold for $84,000 in the United States, while a generic version costs less than $800 in India, the profit motive becomes unmistakable. This profit-driven model extends beyond pharmaceuticals to the illicit drug trade, where synthetic opioids like fentanyl, primarily sourced from China, have become the leading cause of fatal drug overdoses in America, claiming 49,000 lives in 2017 alone. Obviously, this number has been drastically on the rise since that year. The conventional narrative frames this as merely corporate greed and regulatory failure, but deeper analysis reveals troubling connections between pharmaceutical interests, regulatory agencies, and political power. Could the systematic over-medication of society, from the mass prescription of psychotropic drugs to the flooding of communities with addictive substances, represent a coordinated strategy to sedate and control the population? A medicated populace is less likely to question authority or resist exploitation, creating perfect conditions for those who wish to maintain power unchallenged. I understand that we are obviously treading pretty deep into conspiracy theories here, but what's indisputable is that our current trajectory serves specific powerful interests while undermining the physical and mental capabilities of the general population, whatever the cause might be. The forbidden knowledge in this entry isn't merely that we're being poisoned, it's that this poisoning serves a purpose for those at the top of our economic and political hierarchies. Whatever the cause, there is a system in place that benefits the few at the expense of the many. There are individuals and large corporations that profit through manufacturing their products with dangerous, cheap toxins that they know we will be exposed to. These people have the option to change their business practices every single day that they operate, to treat us as fellow humans who deserve to be healthy. But they don't. The first step towards freedom from this system is recognizing its existence and understanding the mechanisms through which it operates. Only then can we begin to investigate who is truly responsible for each of these individual but interconnected issues, and reclaim our health, our minds, and ultimately our collective destiny as members of humanity. Lobbying and collusion exists everywhere between the companies that seek to profit off you and the agencies which were employed to protect you. It's becoming apparent that we're truly starting to reach the depths of forbidden knowledge, as the information we're discussing here can't necessarily be proven or even observed by the general population. But we know it's there in one way or another. Corruption at the highest levels, seeking to benefit one small group at the expense of the masses. We feel it, we can see it, we know it's there because we experience it every single day of our lives. It's not something that can claim to be accidental anymore. What's important is that we stop fighting amongst each other down here and realize that there are faceless, hidden groups of extremely powerful people who seek to destroy us, or at the very least, view us as collateral damage in their pursuit of profit. On this specific topic, I cannot inform you of the truth. I can only encourage you to dig, research independently, and try to find your own answers without the echo chambers of social media. The Vela Incident. In the pre-dawn hours of September 22, 1979, as most of the world slept, a U.S. surveillance satellite called Vela 6911 recorded something extraordinary while orbiting above the desolate waters where the South Atlantic meets the Indian Ocean. The satellite's sensitive instruments detected an unusual double flash of light, a telltale signature that American intelligence agencies have seen 41 times before, each time corresponding to the unmistakable burst of a nuclear explosion. Within hours, staff at Patrick Air Force Base in Florida had issued an alert, and by the next day, President Jimmy Carter was huddled with advisors in the White House Situation Room, confronting what would become one of the strangest mysteries of the Cold War. The Vela satellites were born from the necessities of the nuclear age. Launched as part of Project Vela in the wake of the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty, the satellites were designed with a singular purpose: to detect secretive nuclear tests and ensure compliance with international agreements prohibiting atmospheric nuclear explosions. The advanced Vela satellites carried sophisticated instruments, including bang meters, specialized silicone photodiode sensors designed to monitor light levels over sub-millisecond intervals. These devices could pinpoint the location of a nuclear blast to within about 3,000 miles, and were specifically calibrated to identify the unique optical signature of a nuclear detonation. This signature, what scientists called a double-humped curve, was as distinctive as a fingerprint. A nuclear explosion in the atmosphere produces an intense flash, lasting around a single millisecond, followed by a brief darkness as the expanding shockwave of ionized gas obscures the fireball. Then comes a second, more prolonged and intense emission of light as the shockwave cools, becoming transparent and revealing the intensely hot fireball once again. Nothing in nature is known to produce this precise pattern. It was the unmistakable calling card of a nuclear weapon. What made the September 1979 detection particularly alarming was its location. Far from the established nuclear testing grounds of recognized nuclear powers. Intelligence analysts quickly narrowed the list of potential culprits to two nations: South Africa and Israel. Both countries were suspected of developing nuclear weapons, both had reasons to test under wraps, and both had sufficient technical capacity to conduct such a test. Most tellingly, they shared deep, secretive defense ties during this period. The Carter administration faced an immediate dilemma. The president was preparing for a re-election campaign where he hoped to showcase foreign policy achievements like the Camp David Accords and arms control progress with Moscow. Confirmation that Israel, America's close ally, had conducted a secretive nuclear test would not only reveal that Israel possessed nuclear weapons, something neither acknowledged or denied by Israel to this day, but would also indicate that Israel had violated international norms by testing atmospheric nuclear weapons. It could potentially derail Middle East peace efforts and complicate Carter's re-election prospects. In the days following the detection, the scientific and intelligence communities began to investigate. The CIA formed a distinguished three-man scientific panel, including Harold Agnew, a former director of Los Alamos National Lab, Richard Garwin, a former hydrogen bomb designer, and Stephen Lukasik, a former director of DARPA. By October 10th, they produced a preliminary assessment concluding that the signals were, quote, consistent with detection of a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere. Garwin wrote to a government official on October 19th that he would, quote, bet 2-1 in favor of the hypothesis, that the incident was indeed a nuclear explosion. While no radioactive fallout was immediately detected, researchers later analyzed raw data from the laboratory of Professor Lester von Middlesworth, who had found traces of iodine-131 in the thyroid glands of his sheep, a radioisotope consistent with nuclear fallout. Additionally, hydroacoustic and wave data collected by ocean sensors and analyzed by the Naval Research Laboratory showed evidence of a, quote, unusual and unmistakable event. The highly sensitive radio telescope at the Arecibo laboratory detected an anomalous ionospheric traveling wave around the same time as the Vela recordings. Despite the accumulating evidence, the White House established another panel known as the Ruina Panel, which eventually concluded that the double flash was, quote, probably not the result of a nuclear explosion. This conclusion shocked many of those involved, as it contradicted heavily with the assessments of numerous technical experts and intelligence officials. Donald Kerr, who headed the Nuclear Intelligence Panel, was famously quoted as saying, "We had no doubt it was a bomb." Stonsfeld Turner, the CIA director at the time, reportedly never bought the Ruina report and accepted the agency's prevailing view that the double flash was indeed an Israeli nuclear test. The evidence pointing to Israel was substantial. Israel had compelling motivations to conduct such a test in 1979. The 1973 Yom Kippur War had revealed vulnerabilities in Israel's security that shook the nation to its core. Technical analysis of the Vela event suggested it might have been a test of a boosted primary stage of a two-stage hydrogen bomb, precisely the kind of advanced nuclear technology Israel would have sought to master. South Africa's involvement is believed to have been primarily logistical. While developing its own nuclear program, South Africa's capabilities in 1979 were not yet advanced enough to test such weapons. However, its navy could provide crucial support in the remote testing location. The historical record shows deep military cooperation between the two nations during this period, including sharing of nuclear technology. Alternative explanations have been proposed over the years. Some suggested the satellite might have recorded an exceptionally rare natural phenomenon, such as a meteoroid strike on the spacecraft or a lightning superbolt. The Ruina panel leaned heavily on the possibility of a satellite malfunction or natural event. However, most scientific analyses have dismissed these alternatives as highly improbable. The double flash signature was simply too characteristic, too precise in its profile to be anything other than a nuclear detonation. Declassified documents and subsequent analyses have only strengthened the nuclear test theory. A 2018 study confirmed that it is highly likely that the Vela incident was indeed a nuclear test conducted by Israel. Modern hypervelocity impact physics and recently declassified documents have further undermined the meteoroid collision hypothesis that the Ruina panel had proposed. If Israel did conduct a nuclear test, it violated the tacit understanding with the United States that Israel would refrain from visible nuclear testing. More significantly, though, the Carter administration's apparent decision to downplay or cover up the event raises questions about the complicated nature of relationships between allies when nuclear weapons are involved, and the kind of morally contentious things the US is willing to sweep under the rug for Israel and other allies. The Vela incident appears to have been a moment when powerful evidence of nuclear proliferation was covered up for political expediency. In this remote corner of the world, seemingly far from watchful eyes, international law may have been bent out of convenience for the United States and its allies. This lackluster official response highlights what our governments choose to acknowledge, what they choose to ignore, and ultimately what they hope we will forget. The extent of historical negationism. Historical negationism represents one of the most insidious weapons in ideological warfare. Unlike legitimate historical revisionism, which involves the reinterpretation of historical accounts based on new evidence and scholarly research, historical negationism involves the deliberate distortion or denial of established historical facts for political, ideological, or nationalist purposes. Negationism rejects the foundation of historical evidence and methodology, creating alternative narratives that favor the perception of certain groups and ideologies rather than to achieve historical truth. The power to control the narrative of the past translates directly into power over the present and future. When governments, institutions, or powerful individuals manipulate collective memory and identity, they shape how societies understand themselves and their place in the world. The consequences can be profound, affecting everything from international relations to domestic politics, and even individual identities. What makes historical negationism particularly troubling is that it often operates beyond the awareness of the general public. Most people receive their understanding of history through educational systems, media, and cultural institutions, all of which can be vehicles for both accurate historical knowledge as well as deliberately distorted narratives. This raises an obvious, disturbing question. What if much of what we believe about our collective past has been systematically distorted without public awareness or knowledge? How do we really know that the past, which defines our nations and our beliefs, happened at all? Or, at the very least, that chapters of our history haven't been airbrushed for the optics of those in power? It's objective fact that this has happened across cultures throughout history and is still happening today, especially in authoritarian governments like North Korea, which provides one of the most striking contemporary examples of state-sponsored historical negationism. The North Korean regime has constructed an elaborate alternate history centered on the Kim dynasty, particularly around Kim Il-sung's supposed heroic acts against Japanese occupation. North Korean historical accounts contain numerous omissions, implausibilities, and forgeries, creating a mythological narrative that serves the regime's legitimacy. We see this rewriting and obscuring of history in China as well, which, as you likely know, has systematically suppressed discussion and remembrance of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Nearly 3 decades after the killing of hundreds or possibly thousands of protesters by the People's Liberation Army on June 3rd through 4th, 1989, the Chinese government continues to censor any mention of the event. Families of victims face ongoing surveillance and harassment, and even online references to the crackdown risk severe retaliation. The Communist Party has branded historical inquiry that challenges its narratives as historical nihilism, claiming such investigation, quote, aims to overthrow the Communist Party and the socialist system. The ancient Romans employed a practice now referred to as damnatio memoriae, or a condemnation of memory, against former leaders who had fallen out of public favor. This involved the systematic defacement of visual depictions and literary records of condemned individuals, effectively attempting to erase them from history. This practice occurred through both official decrees by emperors or the Senate and through collective actions by the populace against unpopular leaders. One of the most well-documented cases of modern historical negationism is Turkey's denial of the Armenian genocide. Despite extensive evidence that the Ottoman Turks systematically murdered approximately 1.5 million Armenians between 1915 and 1923, the Turkish government has consistently denied that these events constituted a genocide. Through historic revisionism, religious fanaticism, and Turkish nationalism, the Ottoman Turks and their descendants have systematically denied both the memory of the Armenian genocide and their involvement in it. This denial persists despite widespread and overwhelming historical documentation and eyewitness accounts of the atrocities. While established cases of historical negationism are concerning enough, some theories propose even more radical possibilities. That our entire understanding of the historical timeline might be fundamentally flawed or deliberately manipulated. One such theory you may have heard of is the phantom time hypothesis, first published in 1991 by German historian Heribert Illich. This theory proposes that approximately 297 years between 614 and 911 AD were fabricated through a conspiracy involving Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and possibly Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII. According to Illich, these leaders retroactively manufactured the Anno Domini dating system to position themselves at the symbolically significant year of AD 1000 and legitimize Otto's claim to the Holy Roman Empire. For reference, history tells us that the Anno Domini dating system was established in the year 525 AD. However, it's said that the implementation of the AD system took several centuries. According to this theory, the entire Carolingian period, including the historical figure of Charlemagne, was fabricated through alteration, misinterpretation, and forgery of documentary and physical evidence. If this theory is true, it would mean we are currently living in a year closer to 1728 rather than 2025. An even more expansive theory is the new chronology proposed by Russian mathematician Anatoly Fomenko. Beginning in the early 1980s, Fomenko developed a theory that challenges the entire established chronology of world history. In essence, Fomenko claims that all of recorded history occurred much more recently than traditionally believed, with all of recorded history taking place since 800 AD and the vast majority happening after 1000 AD. According to Fomenko, traditional history is artificially extended because later historians either accidentally or deliberately created phantom copies of events and rulers, essentially repeating the same historical events under different names in different periods and locations. Fomenko's methodology relies heavily on astronomical data and statistical analysis of ruler lists. He compares lists of kings from different civilizations and, by identifying perceived similarities in reign patterns, argues that they represent the same historical figures under different names. For instance, he claims that the biblical kings of Israel are actually just later Western Roman emperors recorded under different names. In Fomenko's revised timeline, Jesus Christ was actually the Byzantine emperor Andronikos Komnenos, born in Crimea in 1152 AD and crucified in Constantinople. Although both the phantom time hypothesis and the new chronology are criticized by modern historians, they highlight the disturbing possibility that our understanding of history could be fundamentally flawed through either deliberate manipulation or accumulated scholarly errors. While these specific theories lack mainstream academic acceptance due to their contradictions with archaeological, linguistic, and scientific evidence, they raise important questions about how we know what we know about the past. History is ultimately constructed through human interpretation of available evidence, always subject to biases, gaps, misinterpretations, and inevitable distortions. The very existence of documented cases of historical negationism throughout various societies and time periods forces us to question how much of our accepted historical narrative might be the product of successful negationism that has never been exposed. Looking back on the suppressed Gnostic texts from earlier, it's obvious that large, complex belief systems have effectively and successfully been removed from our historical knowledge. When governments and powerful institutions can effectively rewrite history within a single generation, as demonstrated in North Korea or with China's handling of Tiananmen Square, it becomes essential to approach historical records with critical awareness. There is a very thin line between legitimate, well-meaning historical revisionism with the goal of improving the accuracy of our knowledge, and negationism with the goal of distorting our records for the benefit of ill-intentioned parties. Secret space programs. The Boeing X-37B orbital test vehicle stands as one of the most fascinating machines in America's space arsenal, cloaked in classified operations that have fueled widespread speculation about its true purpose. This unmanned spaceplane resembles a miniature version of NASA's retired space shuttle, but operates with complete autonomy, capable of spending years in Earth's orbit on missions whose objectives remain largely classified. Since its first orbital deployment in April 2010, the X-37B program has completed 6 missions of increasing duration and is currently engaged in its 7th. The spacecraft's incredible endurance was demonstrated during its 6th mission, which concluded in November of 2022 after an unprecedented 908 days in orbit. The U.S. Space Force and Air Force maintain that the vehicle serves primarily as a platform for testing new space technologies and reusable spacecraft systems, but the extreme secrecy surrounding the specific payloads and mission objectives suggests capabilities far beyond simple scientific experimentation. What makes the X-37B particularly intriguing is its ability to change orbits during missions, effectively disappearing from the tracking capabilities of amateur satellite observers. This maneuverability, combined with a payload bay roughly the size of a pickup truck bed, provides the potential for deploying or retrieving small satellites, testing advanced surveillance equipment, or even serving as a platform for space-based weapons testing. All hypotheses that defense officials will neither confirm nor deny. Ground crews have been recorded approaching the vehicle in hazmat suits upon landing after extended missions, which has deepened suspicions about potentially radioactive or otherwise hazardous materials being transported or tested. The spacecraft's 7th mission, launched in December 2023 aboard a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket, marks a significant escalation in capability as it was placed into a highly elliptical, high Earth orbit for the first time, expanding its operational envelope far beyond previous missions. This dramatic change in deployment suggests that the X-37B may be taking on entirely new classes of missions previously beyond our reach. China has also been rapidly developing its own secretive space capabilities that have raised alarms among international security experts. In November of 2023, reports emerged detailing China's development of a sophisticated, directed energy weapon system utilizing high-powered microwaves capable of targeting and potentially disabling satellites in low Earth orbit. Engineers from China have reportedly overcome significant technical challenges to create a system consisting of 7 emitting devices whose microwave beams can merge to focus devastating energy on a single target. Military analysts have literally likened this capability to the Death Star from Star Wars, which converges multiple energy beams in a superweapon. Unlike traditional anti-satellite weapons that create dangerous orbital debris when used, this microwave technology presents a new, clean method of disabling enemy satellites by frying their electrical components while leaving the physical structure intact. The development appears to be part of China's broader strategy to achieve space dominance, which includes their own secretive spaceplane program that has conducted several orbital missions in recent years. The narrative surrounding secret space programs took an unexpected turn in the early 2000s when a British systems administrator named Gary McKinnon conducted what U.S. prosecutors would later describe as, quote, the biggest military computer hack of all time. Between February 2001 and March 2002, McKinnon penetrated dozens of NASA and U.S. military networks, searching for what he believed was hidden information about UFO and suppressed free energy technology. What he allegedly discovered during these unauthorized intrusions has become legendary within certain circles of the UFO research community and among those who believe in classified space programs operating beyond public knowledge. McKinnon claims to have uncovered an Excel spreadsheet titled Non-Terrestrial Officers, containing names and ranks of individuals not corresponding to any publicly known military personnel. Further, he reported finding references to material transfers between ships with vessel names that didn't match any known naval craft in Earth's oceans. McKinnon interpreted these discoveries as evidence of a secret space fleet, potentially a military branch operating in orbit or beyond, completely hidden from public awareness. Following his arrest in 2002, McKinnon faced potential extradition to the United States to stand trial on charges that could have resulted in a 60-year prison sentence. His case became a decade-long legal battle that concluded only when Theresa May, then the UK's Home Secretary, blocked his extradition on human rights grounds due to his Asperger's syndrome and depressive illness. The realm of classified space operations extends to numerous satellite launches conducted by various nations' intelligence agencies. The United States National Reconnaissance Office Launch 44, or NROL 44 mission, represents one such classified operation that has generated significant speculation. The mission patch associated with NROL 44 depicts 5 wolves, symbolizing solidarity across the Five Eyes intelligence alliance comprising Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. This imagery suggests international cooperation in space-based intelligence gathering activities, potentially involving shared resources and information. Similarly mysterious is Russia's Cosmos 2542 mission, which drew international concern when, after reaching orbit, it released a sub-satellite that began making close approaches to an American KH-11 reconnaissance satellite. These maneuvers, characterized by US space officials as unusual and potentially threatening, demonstrated capabilities consistent with satellite inspection or possible anti-satellite operations. The incident highlighted the growing militarization of space and the development of technologies designed to track, inspect, and potentially interfere with other nations' critical space infrastructure. Although, again, this next one is certainly more of a conspiracy theory than anything else, knowing just how secretive and far-reaching these international military efforts into space are becoming, I'd like to touch on the possibility of the use of direct energy weapons, or DEWs, in secretive militaristic space operations, targeting the citizens of the United States from satellites. These advanced systems, which harness concentrated electromagnetic energy, have sparked concerns about their potential for widespread destruction and covert use against civilian populations. One of the most persistent conspiracy theories surrounding DEWs is their alleged role in causing wildfires across the United States. Proponents of this theory claim that these weapons are being used covertly to create devastating fires, particularly in sparking the recent devastation in California and other western states. They point to unusual burn patterns, the rapid spread of fires, and the intense heat generated as evidence of DEW involvement. Some theorists have gone so far as to suggest that these fires are part of a larger agenda to clear land for development or to enforce population control measures. Now, let me just say, I do not personally subscribe to this theory. My main point here is that the advanced, covert nature of space weapons means there is a growing level of fear and uncertainty regarding how far-reaching the capabilities of military space weaponry truly might be. It's possible that this new kind of weaponry may leave no detectable evidence, making it difficult to detect the true causes behind certain attacks or to hold aggressors accountable. The veil of secrecy surrounding these various space operations points to a reality where Earth's orbit has become the ultimate high ground for military and intelligence operations. Satellites flying high above the Earth are now capable of viewing and targeting every single square inch of our world. Knowing that billions of dollars of secretive international military spending is going into weaponizing space and targeting our planet is intensely horrifying to contemplate. And that brings us to the bottom of the third part of the Forbidden Knowledge Iceberg. I typically only make my iceberg videos around 3 parts long, but this one is just so intense, and I know that I'm nowhere near the bottom here. So I'm willing to continue and move on to a 4th part and maybe even other future parts if you guys did enjoy this. So if that's something you'd like, be sure to leave that down below in the comments and drop a like. Thank you so much for watching once again.